It's been what 2 weeks since the local election catastrophe, since the Tories' version of Black Friday happened, where they lost all these seats, and well, essentially, what I have seen put quite, I think, very succinctly recently is one of the Tories' greatest strengths was their loyalty that they had that sort of tended to bind them together. But ever since, well, really, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and now we're on to Rishi Sunak, that loyalty has been completely eroded. It just does no longer exist in the party. And this is now, I think, reaching fever pitch. And I think every single Tory knows the next general election is not going to be good for them. And they are throwing even more fits because at the local elections, we saw a very, very good demonstration of tactical voting in play. And of course, this is causing more Tories to cope even more about the fact that, well, tactical voting is going to potentially come into play at the next general election. And to be honest, I think that is very likely. That is very, very likely. The message that has been long spread, really, for quite some time about tactical voting, that if you want to get rid of the Tories, you've got to vote tactically, seems to have finally gotten through to the public at large. So, with this in mind, it was only a matter of time before Conservatives once again started coping, certainly about the losses of the recent recent, shall we say, local elections, and now are worrying about this playing a big factor in the general election. So, let's have a look at this. And I don't know if we'll dub this new character I'm creating called Conservative Bane.
Don't worry. Tactical voting won't lack. It'll be ours. Ours is the land for tactical voting.
Oh, yeah. Honestly, I think I need to look into more of that, of creating Bane as like a conservative, crazy Conservative Party candidate.
Yes, we need more babies so that then they can take over Gotham.
Oh, yeah. Expect more Conservative Bane in the future. um, yeah. So anyway, we're gonna go diving into this. But before we do that, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, as always, thank you very much for all those people who do help support the channel that way. Like I say, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one of today's link called Buy Me Coffee, and of course, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on with this then. So this comes from Conservative Home, the title of Tactical Voting Probably Won't Decide the Election, but it could help tip the map against the Conservatives in the long run. Interesting that tactical voting's not going to decide the next election, but it will have a significant impact on us in the long run. Wait, what? How can you say we don't have to worry about tactical voting, but actually we have to worry about tactical voting? So, how worried should the Conservatives be about tactical voting? In the wake of the rout at the local elections, one of the stories was the way that voters have seemed to be coalescing around the anti-Tory option, and that were that to happen in a general election, all sorts of exciting things might happen. Such speculation is the grist to the mill for the hacks and wonks alike, allowing, as it does, to innumerably for pegs for articles and endless excuses to play around with maps and data. And yet, these are the types of people that look at this data. And I've said very well, even before the local election happened, this local election is going to be examined in minute detail as to what happened and what could potentially be the outcome of a general election. So, of course, they are going to do that and examine these things. I mean, no offense, the hacks and the wonks, that's sort of what they do. And yet you're annoyed that they're bringing this up, that they're bringing attention to the fact that, this anti-Tory option or tactical voting, mainly being either vote for Lib Dems if you are in a sort of stronger sort of, Lib Dem area, or if you're in the Labour area, then vote for Labour. Either way, the Tories don't win. And of course, you get to coalesce around a stronger form of that vote. So, yet precisely for that reason, we ought to perhaps be a little cautious about over-egging it. Even in the recent run of the usually exciting general elections, the results seldom, albeit never, reflecting the wildest projections. Not 100% true that. Very often these projections do have a margin of error, but they're not wildly out of sync. Most of the big polls we have seen have really been focusing on the fact that, yeah, the Conservatives are going to lose big. And I think this is, to be honest, Henry Hill coping about the fact that a lot of these predictions do not show good news for his party. But anyway, we'll continue. So in part, this is because the smaller parties often struggle to translate effective strategies from local or by-elections into the much more resource-intensive area of general elections. So again, I agree. People like the Greens always happen. They have really good election results, and then they say, "Oh, this will finally translate into a general election result," and it never has happened yet. But I think if you go into and look at sort of tactical voting, how it plays out, well, here's the thing: the Lib Dems have been scoring some fantastic results against the Conservatives. And it has all been based on what they have been seeing and taking that experience from the local elections. And they have proved this is a winning strategy, that they are winning in a lot of these seats, which should be making a lot of Tory MPs, especially in these safe, what should be safe Conservative blue wall seats, very, very nervous. And it leaves essentially Rishi Sunak with a very difficult choice, because if he focuses on the red wall, he potentially loses his blue wall seats. If he focuses on the blue wall, then he loses the red wall. And the thing is, Sunak cannot, if he wants to win, or at least lose betterly, I suppose the phrase would be, then he has to at least keep one of those walls intact. And the balancing act that Boris Johnson was able to do certainly seems that Rishi Sunak can't do that. But anyway, back to this. So Dr. Patrick English of YouGov explained, "We also expect a fair whack of the Lib Dem and Green vote from the 2023 locals to go to Labour at a general. And depending on how how efficient or inefficient it is, or vice versa, the Lib/Green/Tory seat battles, that may very play well into the Conservatives' favour across the significant bits of the Blue Wall and East England." Here's the thing. Greens, especially, probably more than any other party, I think, vote tactically. Like we have seen, especially when it comes to general elections, Greens are very, very aware that there are seats where they cannot win, like an MP, because, well, there aren't enough of them. But in some cases, they do have enough of a tilt to be able to weigh at least a significant chunk of votes to oust a potential Tory candidate. And if the Lib Dems can also get on that, as well as the Labour people in those areas as well, to either support Lib Dems or, again, Lib Dems supporting Labour, as, again, we would see in a tactical voting situation, which we saw at the local elections, that is very likely to be the downfall of a lot of Conservative MPs. So, back to it. So Conservative MPs doing the media round after the local elections have also suggested that many Tory voters had stayed at home rather than switched and may actually come out in 2024. Again, while that is certainly the case, how do you know that they're going to come out in 2024? That's very, very optimistic, because I've said this before in a couple of the local elections we've seen and sort of before. Conservatives have a very high turnout rate. The fact that you have had conservatives and a large conservatives stay at home does risk a very, or should I be asking a very interesting question. If they're not going to come out for local elections, why and what is going to tempt them to come out for a general election? Because, it might be a general election, but why are they going to come out? If they are not approving of the party and the direction of the party is going in, why then is that going to change for a national election? And I think that question should have to be asked, because this is one of the big coping things that they've seen as, don't worry, all those conservatives that stayed at home, they'll come out and join us for the national, for the big general election. Well, what's going to bring these people out? If you couldn't bring them out to vote at a local election, what's going to bring them out to vote a general election? So, Dr. English also notes that we didn't see much evidence of a third place squeeze, though at the 2023 locals, it is unclear if there is any new or fresh tactical voting emerging beyond they are Lib Dems or Labour stronger around here effect that we have noticed since 2019 already. And again, 2019, big push for tactical voting. Didn't really get the message across, unfortunately, very much in 2019. But now I think that message is becoming a lot louder and a lot clearer, that if you want to get rid of these guys, you've got to vote tactically. And that is really sinking through. So, yet according to the pollsters I spoke to, the main reason not to overstate its significance for the next general election, at least, is simply that unless the government manages to close the polling gap significantly between now and polling day, it simply won't decide the outcome, saying that the effective of tactical voting or substantial negative partnership could apparently cost the Conservatives an additional 20 to 30 defeats. It is painful, to be sure, but smaller by some margin than the Labour seats lead implies by current polling. So again, this is the Conservatives hoping, or at least praying, that there's going to be this electoral narrowing. Now, there has been at least some evidence of there being some electoral narrowing, but this is again very dropping off. Sunak is still very, very much in his holiday period, I suppose, his honeymoon period, which again we have seen and we always suspected he was going to get some boost. And while certainly has had some big wins recently with the things like the Pacific Partnership and the Windsor Agreement, which we have seen lead to this boost, the idea that Sunak is going to be weathering those troubles coming up in the next coming months and weeks before a next general election is not very likely. And I think he's still riding high off those two electoral things that have given him a bit of a boost. And yeah, they have given him a bit of a boost. But those boosts will not last for long. That is for sure. So in the event of a close fought election, which is due to an electoral system that could hinge on a few hundreds or even thousands of votes in the tightest of constituencies, voters prioritizing the defeat of Tory candidates becomes more threatening. So again, now they're saying, oh, well, if it's going to be a tightly fought election because, election narrowing, now it becomes a bit of a danger. But also, surely somewhat less likely, as such a scenario implies that Rishi Sunak has achieved at least a mark of rehabilitation of the government's reputation. So, first of all, as we said, one of his big things that I think has led to this sort of narrowing recently has been the fact that he has done things like we've got the Pacific Partnership, we've got the Windsor Framework. Those have led to bumps in his numbers. But that didn't really reflect in these local elections. And his approval rating, I think you are going to see very, very much a tumble, because there's a lot of challenges that Sunak is going to have to sort of try and tackle in the next coming weeks and months, especially as we head from the summer back into yet another very probably difficult winter. And people are going to start complaining about, well, all these gas bills and all the cost of living crisis still continuing to cause a lot of trouble, and the government seemingly just sitting on its hands doing nothing. What do you think is going to happen? However, there is more at stake at the next election than who gets the keys to number 10. Even if the immediate effect of a significant anti-Tory voting is just a somewhat bigger bruise, it could end up lasting a lot longer and turn a nasty shade of yellow. Again, worrying about the fact that the Lib Dems are going to sort of be taking their seats and that these tactical votings are going to lock them out of seats all of a sudden, which is why, again, we should do and really look at tactical voting, but also what I've also said, we need to change the voting system. So, the Liberal Democrats would certainly be the chief beneficiaries of any serious tactical voting, for they are well positioned as challengers in such a church of seats where Labour is simply not competitive. The Greens may yet get there sooner or later, as Peter Franklin wrote yesterday, but they aren't there yet. Not only could this threaten the Conservatives' incumbents in seats where the party won during its massacre of its junior coalition partner in the 2015 election, it could also see the start to take chunks out of the blue wall too. Which, again, as we've said at the beginning, this should be the Conservatives' big worry, because Sunak at a general election is going to have to think where he puts his focus. And the thing is, if he turns to the blue wall, he loses the red wall. If he turns to the red wall, he loses the blue wall. And if he tries a balancing act like Boris Johnson did, Sunak cannot. He cannot do that same balancing act that Boris Johnson had. He does not have the charisma. He does not have the personality in able to sustain that. So, the government's failure to do anything about London's housing crisis means that the capital is now starting to export voters into its wider community belt. So, as Dr. English noted on this site, the average age in those constituencies is dwindling, even as the national average of age continues to climb. The pollsters we spoke to identified the M25 ring and the surrounding areas as the key danger point. Not for doing nothing did Sir Ed Daly kick off his party's local election campaign in Berkhamsted, my hometown, a very nice part of the soon-to-be former Southwest Hertfordshire constituency, which until just a few years ago returned the Tories most exclusively at a country, borough and town council level. And again, that has not been happening. Obviously, the stronger challenge in these areas is that the few resources that CCHQ can now direct to Labour-facing constituencies. But worse, in the long run, is that one of these such seats that are lost, it may prove very difficult to get them back. Consider the decade of forlorn attempts by Tories in areas such as Hazel Grove in Manchester or much of the southwest to try and recapture the once safe Conservative seats which fell in 1997, which brought about the burden of Davis's MPs are free to do all the things to all people and striking pious notes at Westminster about housing, refugees, and what have you, whilst working very hard to ensure that no homes, holding centres, reservoirs, what have you, end up in their constituencies. A tolerant, progressive Britain, yes, but keep little, the keep the little whinging special. So again, this is the often it is the Conservatives who level this at the Lib Dems that if you put a Lib Dem MP in your constituency, then they'll talk a big game, but won't actually deliver for you. That is the much delivered criticism against them, again, by Conservatives. But where has been the evidence that this is the case, that these Lib Dem MPs have not delivered for their constituencies? Now, yes, they haven't formed a or at least been in power since that coalition, and really the Lib Dems haven't really been in power. But of course, even though you are an MP, you can still do bills, you can still do all kinds of sort of advocacy for your constituency. The Lib Dems do make a lot of effort, knowing that, to try and keep their seats, and they do a lot of work to keep their seats, very, very much so. So the idea that they talk a big game but don't deliver isn't really substantiated. So say what you like about this approach, but it is can't say it, but it is maddeningly effective. I can't even say it. The last time it took the coalition to break the spell, and the Lib Dems are not likely to repeat that mistake anytime soon. Here's the thing. Who were they in coalition with? They were in coalition with the Conservatives. And bear in mind, at that general election, the Conservatives did everything they could to pin all their failures of their policies, everything on the Lib Dems. Said, oh, no, it's not our fault. It's the Lib Dems' fault. And then the thing is, when they got in and they were fully in power, what did they do? They doubled down on austerity. They continued to push the exact same bad policies which they were blaming the Lib Dems for. So going forward, as I said, this idea that they sort of don't deliver, that they don't do anything, well, last time this happened, all the Conservatives' most successful advantage at that 2015 general election was they blamed the Lib Dems and then continued to double down on all the policies they had blamed the Lib Dems for failing on. So, of course, this danger does not attend exclusively on tactical voting. Of course, the same process which saw the Conservatives crack the red wall could crack the blue wall too. The realignment giveth, and the realignment taketh away. This is the big thing. You see a lot of Conservatives talking about, oh, you don't understand, there was this big realignment of voters in 2016. The entire electoral map has shifted. We've got to sort of change with the times. Well, here's the thing. Boris Johnson was able to win that big majority primarily by promising two things. First of all, he promised, oh yes, we're going to finally get Brexit done. And of course, he promised to level up. Now, what has happened with those promises? First of all, he may have got Brexit done, but the consequences of Brexit have become clear to everyone. You can see it in the polls. Most people wish they had never voted for Brexit and that it never had happened, and that we'll be better off rejoining. And then leveling up, the much promised, that we were finally going to level up these left behind areas, that we were going to sort out all these problems, that we would reinvest in these areas. Well, what's happened to leveling up? Boris Johnson gave up on it. Rishi Sunak defunded all the money, didn't give it enough money the projects needed to succeed. Instead, it was merely like a drop in the bucket of what these areas needed. The EU funds that these areas used to get were not replaced. Instead, these areas are now pretty much forced to compete for a pittance of the funding that they used to have access to. So this idea that leveling up was going to be this great success, and that is something Rishi Sunak could run on, and that most of these red wall MPs can run on the fact of, oh, hasn't leveling up been such a success in my area? if you come to these red wall seats and you talk to many of these people that the first time ever had a Conservative MP, they're not going to win. You know, the idea that this this realignment has been permanent or has sunk in, or the fact that what they also don't understand was many of them took a chance on Boris Johnson because they believed he wasn't like the rest of the Conservatives, that he was going to fulfill their promises. And of course, well, look what happened. So this alignment, this flood of this big realignment has not, shall we say, set in stone. It has not. A lot of those 2019 intakes of those red wall MPs, again, we're still calling it the red wall. You know, it says everything you need to know about that. But anyway, back to it. So our electoral geography could look very different in 10 years to what we've been used to. Again, trying to say, oh, you don't understand realignment. That's what we need to do. We need to focus on the realignment. But if CCHQ does want to try and hold onto a very broad coalition that Boris Johnson marshaled behind the Conservatives in 2019, it may need to pay more heed to the yellow peril than a narrow assessment of its likely impact on the Downing Street horse race would warrant. Yeah, I very much doubt. Not honestly too much talk about the effect of, you know, tactical voting, why people are voting tactical, for the fact that in these areas people feel that because of certainly the Conservative majority in these safe seats, that people's and sort of want these progressive policies, that their policies are split. Again, as much as this was meant to be an article about don't worry about tactical voting, there wasn't really too much talk about tactical voting, why people are talking about tactical voting. Instead, big focus on the fact that, oh, don't worry, Conservatives didn't turn up for the local elections, but they're going to turn up. They're going to turn up in, the general election. Trust me, guys. Trust me. I said it before in the video. If these Conservatives haven't turned up for a local election, why are they going to turn up for a general election? Because it is highly unusual for Conservatives to do that, to stay at home. Highly unusual. The next big thing, of course, is, oh, don't worry, the realignment's going to really see us. It's really the whole electoral map has completely changed. In reality, what was once the blue wall is going to move north, and, you know, the north of England is going to be the new home of Toryism. That's what's going to happen. Again, this is what some Conservatives do preach. The idea that this is going to happen, that, you know, it's the north of England is going to become the blue north. This is going to be the big electoral realignment that we're all expecting. You know, Boris Johnson has planted the seeds for this to happen, and it doesn't matter if we lose these old traditional Tory areas, because we're going to gain all this new area. And yet, if you go out and you talk to people in these areas, they're not happy. They are not happy with their Conservative MP. They haven't been happy for a long while, because they realized very, very quickly that Boris Johnson wasn't fulfilling his promises, especially on levelling up, which was what a lot of these red wall MPs were elected on and ran their entire campaigns on. What do many of these Northern Tory MPs have to show for it? Not a lot. They don't have a lot at all. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.